MSNBC's anti-Bernie bias is pretty obvious, but today there were at least 2 stories that went viral on social media that show just how deep that bias and virus runs. So let's start with the first example. Here is Chris Matthews, who gets paid the big bucks to give you his expert political analysis.
Suppose you're lying on a road hurt. Maybe you've had something happen to you. You fainted, whatever happened. Which of the candidates would stop their car and get out and help you? Which of them? Ask yourself that question, and you got your candidate, I think. Because I'm not sure about all of them. I've been polling this sort of in, I think Biden wins that one pretty easily. I think Elizabeth maybe. I don't think Bernie wins it. Do you? Honestly? Think Bernie would stop and help you? I'm not sure. Well, I know these are tough questions. They cut to the gut, but they are the question you got to ask about. Will this person help me when I need them? Because the rest is BS. It's all speech writing.
Okay, so I'll say, yeah, I think Bernie would help me.
You're covering yourself. Joe, you're covering yourself.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Isn't Joe Scarborough a Republican? Like, the fact that Joe Scarborough is like the voice of reason in that segment is incredible to me, right?
Yeah, I mean,
what was that?
So when he first started, I was like, well, not only polling, but any kind of common sense would indicate the person who's going to pull over to help you is Bernie Sanders. The one that, the candidate that the polling indicates most relate to people, most care about the things I care about, most honest, it wins easily among all the candidates. And I'm like, where's Matthews going with this? Because there's no way he's going to say Bernie Sanders, right?
Oh, he said it.
Right, and I was like, I'm sure he'll say Biden, but is he really going to say that Sanders wouldn't stop?
And he questioned whether Elizabeth Warren would, right? So he's like, I don't know, maybe Elizabeth, but definitely not Bernie Sanders. Like, I think both people would stop and help someone who needs help.
Although these days, if it's an MSNBC anchor, Bernie might not stop. Because they, if someone did get run over on the side of the road, it was Bernie by MSNBC.
Yeah.
I mean, like this out of nowhere, like, oh my gut. By the way, this is the same Chris Matthews who said his gut told him that the American people wanted to have a beer with George Bush.
They did though.
And he made him it made him like more personable, more affable, more likable. God, Al Gore, he's what a guy who cares about issues. Boring. Nobody wants to have a beer with him. He's smart. Nobody cares about that. Bush is like a cowboy, and the way that he landed on their aircraft carrier, Chris Matthews went on. And then one time he talked about how Bush was towel snappy with him. And he's a Yale guy, but I couldn't believe a Yale guy was towel snappy with Chris Matthews. It's so sad. So is any of this backed up by any facts? No, it's just his gut that in Washington, people like Chris Matthews hate Bernie Sanders.
So, and also, look, I think the country has changed. I think the electorate has changed. There's a lot more on the line right now because people are suffering. So I don't think anyone's thinking to themselves like, who do I want to have a beer with? Because the fact of the matter is there are a ton of people that I'd love to have a beer with, but I don't want them in charge of my health care. You know, or making decisions about what happens to health care.
Besides which, Bush is a recovering alcoholic. You definitely don't want to have a beer with him.
Yeah. Okay. All right, well, let's move on because there was one other segment on MSNBC recently that is getting quite a bit of attention. There's a financial guy named Steve Ratner who came on, okay? He actually manages Mike Bloomberg's cash. And so he had some thoughts on Bernie Sanders.
No conflict of interest at all, though.
No conflict of interest.
No, and you wouldn't want to state that and let your audience know. Let him just go after Bernie Sanders without stating it at all.
But this was actually a very enlightening interview because he said the quiet parts out loud. Take a look.
The more that Bernie Sanders rises, the more, and I see this very much now happening already among my activist Democratic friends, the more people are getting scared about a Bernie Sanders candidacy for 2 reasons. First, because they think he'll lose, and second, they think if he wins, he'll implement the kinds of policies that I outlined a few minutes ago, which are so far away from the center of the Democratic Party. So there's a lot of activity around trying to, quote, stop Bernie, although it isn't called by that just yet.
So he just straight out said, like, my Democratic activist friends who love this current power structure that really disenfranchises Americans, they're really fighting hard to make sure that he's not the nominee.
Okay, God, I love that because he even almost was a parody of himself by doing this voice. Okay, but let's talk about the substance first. He said, "My activist Democratic friends." you work on Wall Street. You have activist Democratic friends, and what you mean is active donors.
Right.
So let's be clear about what you mean. Those people are not going and knocking on doors and canvassing.
They're totally canvassing. They're making phone calls, during their lunch break.
Yeah.
Like, yo, what's up? Hey, just wanted to make a call for my homeboy, Mayor Bloomberg. No.
Right. They're not carrying around signs. Okay, they're not going to protest. Activist Democratic friends on Wall Street. Hilarious. And then he says, and Bernie's plans are not at the center of the Democratic Party. Wait a minute, the polling indicates they most certainly are. Even the ones that are considered controversial by the liars on television who make it appear as if they're controversial, Medicare for all. Most recent poll from the New York Times, 81% of Democratic voters want Medicare for all. 81%. If that's not the center, I don't know what is. Increasing Social Security, I can go on and on and on. But they're not the center of the Democratic friends on Wall Street. The Democrats on Wall Street hate those plans. And they're like, oh, I do declare. Let's send out Stevie Ratner to tell everyone that Wall Street says no to Bernie Sanders. And we'll be looking for a new candidate like Mike Bloomberg. How's his money doing, Steve?
Yeah, and then later in the segment, he talked about how Bloomberg is a perfect option if Biden can't make it.
No,
as like
funny
the
how that
centrist.
works.
Yeah, so look, we know where his loyalties lie. We know what his motivations are. It's just hilarious how this is being passed off as news for the American people or analysis for the American people. This is nonsense propaganda. But what really took the cake, and I know that this is an older video, we didn't talk about it on the show because it happened over the weekend, was a conversation that Joy Reid had with a body language expert on Bernie Sanders. Let's take a look.
No, before we go to the video, I just want to remind you guys, this is what Washington considers the left-wing channel on television. So the left, is there any channel more hostile to progressives than MSNBC? If you're not convinced yet, now let's watch.
Scandals hurt you more when they seem plausible, right? I mean, Bernie Sanders does have a sort of physicality, when he talks, that is a shaking your finger at Hillary Clinton, shaking your finger, shovey, weirdy. His physicality makes me think, he could have said, listen, I think in this environment a woman can't win.
I think Bernie's lying. We see him, he slouches forward anyway, Joy, but here he turtles. If you look at his eye level where he normally answers questions, when he makes the denial, his whole shoulders come up like a little kid getting caught. His eye level is below his shoulders. This is trying to hide in plain sight. And many of us, we don't know what to look for. So if you look for this right out of the gate, and the strongest denial is simply saying no. And I think women in particular, we want to believe human beings. So we're like, I would say that. He literally said, well, as a matter of fact, I didn't say it. That's 9 words. Unnecessary. No. Did you vote for Donald Trump in the last election?
Absolutely no.
Right? So no. Did you dress up as an Easter bunny on Easter?
Absolutely no.
Right? So it's no. We say no. Absolutely is actually not the strongest denial. You're playing with me here in the game, but at least you're getting the no in here. We're not hearing the no with Bernie.
How is Joy Reid not embarrassed? How are you not embarrassed by that segment? I would be mortified if producers suggested that I interview a body language expert. No interest. I would do anything and everything in my power, even if it was a body language expert to talk about a political candidate that I can't stand. Because it is comical to do a segment like that. It's embarrassing.
No,
wow.
No, to be fair, Anna, I think he clearly turtled.
He used 9 words, and when you use 9 words, what kind of
everyone knows
crazy conversation was that?
What is this, like Glenn Beck kind of numerology too? If you use 9 words, everyone knows it's a lie, whereas 8 or 1 or 13 words are clearly correct. Okay, besides which, did you see his physicality? By the way, it's not just a body language expert. Joy brought up physicality several times, and she said he was weirdy. That's a word I didn't know. That's a fun new word.
Okay.
He was weirdy and turtley, and then another favorite of mine. He was hiding in plain sight. Another word for that is not hiding. Okay, so this is the so-called liberal channel in Washington, and this is what Washington thinks is left wing. Like, hate the most progressive candidate of our lifetimes, bring on kooks to talk about the number of words he used and how he resembles animals, okay? And bring on Wall Street tycoons who are clearly in another candidate's camp to ambush him and say weird things like, "Oh, he wouldn't stop if you were pulled over. If you got run over the side of the road, he wouldn't stop. I know it." Okay, no, they're not remotely left-wing. They're not remotely progressive. In fact, they're the exact opposite. No one attacks Bernie Sanders more than MSNBC does.
And it sounds like they were body shaming him in that segment.
And it sounds like maybe they're trying to manufacture consent for the establishment, and they are the supposed opposition, the loyal opposition, if you will.